So welcome to our session on how to confront microaggressions, something that a lot of us have dealt with. My name is Carlos Aguilar. I use he and they pronouns, and I am very lucky and privileged to work for California Change Lawyers. We are a foundation, and our mission is to build a better justice system for all Californians and to empower the next generation of legal change makers. We've been doing, starting this year, a series of webinars to help create the conditions of success for the next generation of change makers, especially those who are first generation, people who are queer or non-binary, women, and people of color. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that all of us are living in an incredibly challenging time with the coronavirus. It's truly surreal what is happening right now and the feelings that it's eliciting in us. And so at the moment when we don't have a lot of control over our lives, it's nice to get together, even in this format, to share and build community. Our format today will be a presentation from Karen Fleshman. She's amazing. I'm about to introduce her in a few minutes. And she'll be talking for about 50 minutes, and we'll have a Q&A session at the very end. So if you have questions for Karen throughout, or just want to add your thoughts, please use the chat box and also the Q&A function. And throughout the session, I'll be curating it and then doing a Q&A session with Karen at the very end. And before I introduce someone very special, I want to just set a very intentional tone for this space. In this space, we really value honesty, we value vulnerability, and we value emotions. And above all, we value your identities, whatever they may be. And we're about to embark on a discussion that will center the voices and experiences of people of color, of queer people, of non-binary folks, and of anyone who does not fit the mold of what a leader looks like. As such, Karen, our expert, is not here to tell people of color how to feel or how they should engage. Rather, she and us at Change Lawyers, we are just here to present one framework. So with that in mind, I would like to present to you all Rosa Patterson. I met her a couple of years ago, and she is remarkable. She received one of her scholarships a couple of years ago when she was a law student, and today she's an associate at a law firm. Rosa is an avid public speaker. In fact, she gave the keynote at our scholarship reception a few years ago. She also gave the commencement speech at her high school, at her college, and at her law school. So, I mean, get it. She is deeply rooted in social justice. Her community work focuses on a wide range of issues: public school integration, diversity initiatives, and immigration. And this is all on top of her day job. And at her law firm, she serves on leadership roles. So with that in mind, let me introduce you to Rosa, who's gonna tell you all a little story.
Great, can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up, okay. Thank you so much for Carlos. Thank you so much for Carlos, and thank you, Change Lawyers, for having me here. I'm obviously a huge fan of Change Lawyers, California Change Lawyers, and glad to be here with you all today. So I am someone who has actually experienced far too many microaggressions to keep track of. But what's interesting is that this is my first time publicly talking about this topic. And I think that's important to highlight and interesting to know. And I think part of that reason why it's my first time publicly talking about it is because of the nature of these aggressions. They are small or seem small. They are easy to dismiss. A lot of times it's easy for us to just undermine our experiences and think, oh, somebody else has gone through far more. And so we tend to underplay it. And I think that's part of the reason why this is, despite me having far too many experiences to count, why this is my first time actually publicly sharing it. But just because they're micro or seem micro nonetheless does not mean they're not aggressions. So kudos to California Change Lawyers for having this platform, and the fact that there's many of you on here says that you care about it and you all understand that it's important to highlight. So my experiences are far too many to recount in a couple minute speech, so I'll just highlight two very similar experiences with you all. And these experiences happened in my first couple of years as practicing as a lawyer. And the first one happened at a mediation. I was attending a mediation to try and settle a case. And I went to this mediation with 3 partners from my company. And in this room, and as I often am, I'm the only Black female in that room. And we're having a conversation about, how the partner actually from my office, and in that room, it's just me, the 3 partners and me, and the partner was talking about how this is costing the client a lot of money, and the client is going to have to pay for fees of 3 partners and 1 paralegal. So automatically just assumed that I was the paralegal in the room. And that moment really struck out to me because it came from someone in my office. And so I thought, wow, what a missed opportunity for us to get to know each other. I was new to the profession, new to the company, and eager to meet other partners, but automatically something about looking at me made the partner assume that I must be the paralegal on this case and not just the attorney on the case. The second experience that I've had with microaggressions is it's also similar. I attended a mediation, this time just another partner and me on the case. A case I had just been working long and hard on, that I know the case very well. It's been a long day of mediation, and again, I'm the only Black, the partner I went with is a white male, I'm the only Black female, as I often am in private practice in the room. And so long day of 10 hours working. And this time the aggression I experienced did not come from someone on my team, but it actually came from the mediator, who's a retired judge. And he referred to me as the partner's assistant. And I was surprised that I actually corrected him this time around. I think it's been over 10 hours. And so I kind of felt comfortable. And I been sitting next to this mediator for hours, and so something just made me feel comfortable. And I can't remember exactly what he said, but I'm pretty sure the partner also jumped in, so I think that helped, and said, "Oh, she's actually one of our attorneys." And so I said, "Yeah, I'm one of the attorneys. I'm young, I'm new, blah blah blah, but I'm one of the attorneys." And so a few observations stuck out to me about that particular interactions and that interaction. The first one is that it made me feel better because I corrected him. Somehow I decided to speak up, and so I felt better about it. The second observation is that he took the time to apologize. He actually apologized profusely. He said, "I don't know why I thought that, I'm sorry." And you can tell he felt some kind of guilt that over 10 hours of me being in the room, the whole time he assumed I was the assistant. This third observation I had was that how much qualifications I put in my response to him to make him feel better about what he said. So I said, "Oh, I'm young, I'm new, this is my first, second year, it's okay. I get this often," which I do. I said that, and I think that is important to just think about, because I noticed that I do this often in my career, even up to now, where other people will ask me, "What do I do?" And rarely do I say I'm an attorney. And I think part of that has to do with these qualifications and that other people put on me. And rarely do people call me everything but the attorney in the room often. So I hesitate to see myself as the attorney when I'm asked to introduce myself. And I had one example. A lot of times I'll just say, "Oh, I work at a law firm." I had one particular example where I was introducing myself to someone after church, and the person I was introducing myself happens to be an attorney as well. And so she said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I work at a law firm." And she said, "Are you an attorney?" I said, "Yeah, but I just graduated and this and that, again, create all my qualifications." And she said, "You should just say it. You're an attorney. It doesn't matter. You passed the bar, you're practicing. You should just say you're an attorney." And so I just want to leave you all with that. No matter what qualifications other people see, what they label you in the room, own who you are. If you are the law student, say you're the law student. If you're the activist, say you're the activist. And if you're an attorney, say you're an attorney, just as I'm working on saying that. So thank you so much for allowing me to share. Unfortunately, I'll have to leave a little early, but if you have any questions, feel free to send them, and Carlos will relay them to me as well.
Thank you so much, Rosa, for sharing that. Thank you for your honesty. I know that a lot of times sharing these experiences can be very triggering for us as the people that it happened to, or others in the room. So thank you for holding that space with us today. And I'm
Yes.
glad you talked about that, because Karen is actually going to be talking explicitly about what you just mentioned, about how to sort of deal with these microaggressions when you're faced with them. So now let me introduce Karen Fleshman. Karen is a lawyer. She is an activist. She's a single soccer mom. And she is the author of the upcoming book, which sounds amazing, and I can't wait to read it. White Women, We Need to Talk, Doing Our Part to End Racism. In 2014, Karen founded Racy Conversations, which is a workshop facilitation company to help people feel more willing and able to communicate honestly with each other about race. And her mission is to inspire the first anti-racist generation. Karen, okay, so this is my favorite part about Karen. She has been arrested 5 times at the US Senate protesting the confirmation of Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and once for protesting family separation. So in the chat box, please send all your snaps, all your emoji snaps for Karen. She's passionate about police accountability. She's an activist and volunteer on the work group overseeing the implementation of the US Department of Justice recommendation on ending bias in the San Francisco Police Department. So Karen, thank you so much for joining us today, and please take it away.
I've heard that same story from so many friends of mine, and just the way you took the courage to speak out, even though it was really hard. And I'm so grateful that you did that. And I just really am grateful that we started this conversation hearing from you. So thank you for that. And thank you for everyone who's joined from all across the country. I was looking at the names, and so many friends of mine are on here. It's really exciting to see you all. So thank you for making time for us today. Okay, now, how do I advance? Okay, here we go. So today we're going to talk about You Belong, how to confront microaggressions. I founded Racy Conversations in 2014. The early part of my career was in the immigrants' rights movement, and then I switched focus to workforce development. So I was preparing young adults to enter the workforce. And in 2014, it became really clear to me that the underlying challenge in our society is racism, and that unless and until we address racism, many of our other attempts to improve society are going to remain futile. So our mission is to inspire the anti-racist generation. I'll talk a little bit about that. Our values are love, learning, action, accountability, and Black and Indigenous women get paid. So I hope we can practice all of those values today as a community agreement of how to approach this conversation. These are some of the great organizations we've had the opportunity to work with. Some of you may have seen my 2018 video, No More Permit Patties, on AJ Plus. I confronted Permit Patty and gave her a piece of my mind about why she needed to stop. And that fortunately led to the book contract. Unfortunately, because of coronavirus, the publication date has been pushed back a little bit to September 2021, but I am hard at work on this book, and really hard at work confronting white women like me. And thank you, Carlos, for beginning with that statement that it is not my position as a white woman to come in and tell people of color how to respond when they're being harmed. The reason why I came up with this framework was in working with all of these young adults who were starting their careers in corporate America and were being bombarded with microaggressions. We came up with this framework together as a way to respond, in a way to center their emotional experience and also to turn it into a teaching opportunity. Because while there are very malicious people in the workplace who do these things intentionally to cause harm, there are other people that this is literally the behavioral manifestation of their unconscious bias. And so by calling attention to it, it's a way to prevent it from happening, as well as a way to really use your agency and your power in the workplace. And I really want to encourage, as Rosa said, when this is happening to you, it's extremely hard to speak out on your own behalf. So I want to encourage folks to be upstanders for other people. And this is particularly important for white allies in the workplace. A lot of times my friends will say, oh, people will come up to me afterwards and say, oh, that was really messed up. But they won't put their own skin in the game, and they won't address the person who actually caused the harm. And I want to encourage upstanders to speak directly to the person who caused the harm. It's always good to check in with the person who has been harmed if there's time for that, to make sure they want you to do that, because there are times when they won't want you to say anything, but sometimes you just have to seize the moment and act in the moment and do it right then and there. And as I mentioned, I do this work today because I grew up in an all-white community, but then I've made my career in Austin, New York City, now San Francisco. I see the exact same trends in all these communities: limitless career opportunities for white college-educated professionals like me, while many of the people of color who were born and raised in these cities subsist in joblessness and underemployment. And that's what I dedicated my career to, helping young adults access these corporate careers, only to come to hear about all the harm that they were experiencing. And that's when I decided to shift my focus from preparing young adults for the workplace to preparing the workplace for young adults. So with that said, we'd love to hear from you about what's going on since the stay-at-home order has been issued in terms of the microaggressions you're experiencing. So take a minute and answer our poll. Has the intensity and frequency of microaggressions you experience increased, decreased, or remained the same since the stay-at-home order was put in place? And do I have to will the answers just pop up, or do I have to click something?
We'll go ahead and share it once people finish voting, Karen.
Okay, I'm gonna keep rolling. So our agenda for today is to give you a big picture of what is happening in the workplace. Okay, so we're seeing for most folks, it's remained the same, the intensity and frequency of microaggressions. Interesting. Thank you for sharing that with us. We're going to talk about the big picture of what's happening in the workplace. We're going to talk a little bit about why do microaggressions happen, and then we'll get into confronting them. And we will have time for Q&A at the end. So please keep those questions coming, but I'm not going to be really pausing during the material. We'll be addressing them toward the end, but we'll be keeping track of your questions. So, now I'm having okay. So there is a vast demographic shift occurring within the workplace. This slide represents the estimated living population of the United States as of July 2018. The oldest group are the silent generation born 1928 to 1945. They're on the top bar. The bottom bar is the Generation Z, born 1997 to 2012. So we see a rapid increase in the number of people of color in our society. So millennials, 43% identify as people of color, Generation Z, 47%. And they're entering the workplace with very high expectations of the leaders within the workplace and of their colleagues, that they've done their homework and they understand intersectionality, they understand allyship, how not to microaggress. And what they're coming into is a workforce, a workplace where a lot of the people who hold positions of power are boomers or Generation X, who have a very different lived experience and not as much familiarity with these concepts as millennials and Generation Z. So there's a lot of conflict that's happening along those lines within the workplace. And there can be also conflicts between people of the same generation with very different lived experiences, and a huge difference in class perspective, in particular, rooted in systemic racism. Um, okay. It's not only to do with racial and ethnic identity, but also our sexuality and gender identities. There's a big demographic and generational shift happening. Only 48% of Gen Zs identify as exclusively heterosexual, compared to 65% of millennials, and also changing notions of gender identity. So you see on this chart where how the generations break out on believing forms asking for gender should not just include male, female. 60% of Gen Z support that idea, but in older generations, there's less support for that concept. I like to put this slide up at the beginning of my workshops and say, you know, it wasn't that long ago, it was really only about 20 years ago, that smoking was pervasive in our society. But then there was a grassroots movement, largely led by city leaders at the local level, to ban smoking in public spaces. And now signs like this are pervasive, they're really common. So I'm hoping that 20 years from now, there are signs in every workplace, in every public space, that says this is a harm-free campus. And we all know that what that means, and we all uphold it in our interactions with one another. And I'm actually hoping, I see the response to coronavirus as such a generational failure of boomer leadership. And I'm hoping that coming out of this crisis, that we see a big upsurge in millennial leaders, both within our political space and within the workforce. You know, millennials have tremendous power, because in 2019, millennials surpassed boomers as the largest generational group in the electorate, as well as the largest generational group in the workforce. So I really urge you to unite with each other and transform both the way we do work and the way we do our politics, and really showcase all of the really poor leadership exercised by boomers, to illustrate to your colleagues how important it is for a new generation of leaders to emerge from this. What I strive to teach in my workshops, and I'm not going to have enough time to go into detail on these slides here, I'm trying to teach people how to build relationships based in trust in the workplace, how to convey respect in interactions, because what I want is for microaggressions to not happen whatsoever. I want to end harm within the workplace and create a culture of belonging where all people coming to work feel like they can fully contribute, be themselves, not have to code switch, people pronounce their names correctly, people don't make assumptions that they're the assistant, but people really see, hear, and understand each other just as they are. And speaking up is such an important aspect of that. Let's talk a little bit about what is a microaggression. The definition: casual degradations of people in marginalized groups, like saying, "Can I touch your hair?" or "You're so articulate." They can be verbal, physical, or environmental. So oftentimes it's something that someone says, but it can be a way that someone looks at you. It can also be like a piece of art hanging in the environment. So for example, a friend of mine had to testify in her employment discrimination case in front of a painting of George Washington chopping down the cherry tree with Native Americans and enslaved people in the background of this painting while she's testifying about the employment discrimination that she experienced. So that would be an environmental microaggression. It can also be by omission. And we'll talk about that in a minute, about how because people with authority in the workplace, managers, leaders within the workplace, often will feel more comfortable around junior people who look like them, that they will extend opportunities to them, like, oh, let's have lunch together, or mentor them, sponsor them in different ways, in a way that they won't necessarily gravitate toward people of color, and provide that same kind of mentorship and sponsorship, because they feel uncomfortable about them. So that is a microaggression by omission. But oftentimes the people who are doing these microaggressions actually believe that they are complimenting someone, right? They're saying, you're so articulate, thinking that that's a nice thing to say. But the person who's receiving the microaggression feels it very differently. They feel the real meaning: you are inferior or other to me. So I'm pointing out that you're so articulate because it's different from how I assumed you would be. Dr. Ibram Kendi, a huge influence. I highly encourage everyone to read Stamped from the Beginning and How to Be an Anti-Racist. Really doesn't like the term microaggression because he feels like it very much minimizes the harm that is caused. He prefers to call it abuse, and I think he's really accurate. And it was interesting, Rosa was kind of minimizing, oh, compared to like previous generations, these microaggressions, it seems relatively small. But don't forget, people are carrying around intergenerational trauma from what happened to them in the past. And these microaggressions are sending the signal that you're not safe here, which is triggering a lot of this past trauma that you're carrying around. So, it may seem like a relatively small comment, but the impact that it has on the people who experience it is very intense. These kinds of feelings can emerge, and oftentimes what causes people to do is like shrink and perhaps look for another job because they feel so terrible about these things. So I don't want us to think of microaggressions as being minimal. They're actually really, really harmful. And because they come as a surprise often, that also increases their harm because they just kind of emerge out of the blue. I like this picture of Woody because this shows, even a cishet white guy can feel othered by his peers and have very, very real feelings of not belonging when his peers or people in authority make comments to him. Let's explore a couple of microaggressions. So I found this one interesting. This is a Forbes article. What's the next trend in leadership? Black women. And why, I'd love to see in the chat, why is this a microaggression? And what is the intent behind this? Do you think that these people are trying to be harmful by pointing out the next trend in leadership is Black women? And I'm going to open up my chat so I can see. Right. Yes, we are not a trend. Black women have been the leaders for 400 years. Yes, been leading all along as a fad rather than people. Exactly. But do you think this was the author's intent? I think they were trying to make a compliment, right? But it just shows how much, even in so doing, they are othering Black women. Okay, let's see. Oh, here's another one. This is a pretty famous one. This was at Twitter in an engineering all hands, and the only Black guy on the engineering team raised his hand at the end of the meeting and said, hey, what are we doing to increase our diversity around here? And his manager said, diversity is important, but we're not going to lower the bar. He just rolled that out like no big deal. Of course, this is the logical expression of everything. And shortly thereafter, the person that this was said to, Leslie Miley, quit Twitter, did not sign the non-disclosure agreement, and started blogging about this experience. And it really provoked a lot of conversations in Silicon Valley about power in the workplace and diversity and inclusion. Right. I put this up here because I think this is a pervasive attitude among many white people in the workforce. Also, another sign, I don't know if you saw this study that was conducted a few years ago by a company called Nexios. They created a legal memo, and they intentionally put spelling, grammatical, and analytical errors into the memo. And they took the exact same memo and they presented it to legal partners, to law partners. And half the partners, they told them that the memo had been written by Thomas Meyer, who is white. And the other half the partners, they told them that the memo had been written by Thomas Meyer, who is Black. And you see how the exact same memo was evaluated by the partners. Which one do you think, which Thomas Meyer was the white one? Yep. Yes, exactly. Thomas Meyer is the one who is judged harshly and inaccurately. The exact same work is perceived very different ways. So, let me see what is okay. So we'd love to hear from you about what microaggressions you've witnessed or experienced. What was the aggressor's intent? What was their impact? So go ahead and pop some of that into the chat. And I'm just going to keep rolling with the content because we want to make time for the role play. So why do microaggressions happen? What is actually happening? And I call this the vicious cycle of unconscious bias, where white people live in a segregated society. We grow up oftentimes pretty much in intentionally created all white communities, suburbs, neighborhoods, go to largely white schools. And in these environments, we learn stereotypes from our parents, peers, and the media. Then we start to emulate the bias and patterns we learned on personal and institutional levels, accumulate wealth, hoard opportunities for our children, maintain the status quo, and create fear around others, which in turn drives further segregation. And this cycle just keeps going unless and until we very intentionally disrupt it. What this all leads to is what Audre Lorde told us: we have no patterns of relating across our human differences as equals. We only learn patterns of relating across difference in hierarchy. And this, to be male is good, to be female is bad, to be white is good, to be a person of color is bad, to be straight is good, to be queer is bad. All of these hierarchies we learn from a very early age, and we don't really see many role models or examples of what it actually looks like to relate across difference as equals. So Audre Lorde told us back in 1980, we're gonna have to create those patterns ourselves, and we're gonna have to teach each other how to relate across difference as equals. The social scientists have studied interracial interactions to determine why are they often so fraught. And what they found is that we come into interracial interactions with divergent understanding of inequality and goals. White people come into these interactions wanting to be liked, feeling self-conscious because we often have very limited experience relating across difference. We're not self-aware of our racial advantages. We want affirmation of not being racist. This is extremely important to us. No one wants to be perceived as a racist. All of that comes into our mind and we act on stereotypes and we think, oh, I know people of color are really casual, so I'm going to act really casual and then he, she, they will like me. Whereas people of color come into these interactions wanting to be respected, wanting to be seen not as a representative of their entire group, but as an individual with zero desire to affirm to white people that we are not racist. And when white people act too casual, they take it as a sign of disrespect and feel offended by it. I was really grateful when I saw this study because I think it elucidates what is happening in so many of these interactions. So let's dive right in and talk about how to address microaggressions. And I just want to check my clock to make sure we're doing okay on time. This is great. We're doing great on time. So thank you so much. I'm sorry, I am not seeing what's going on in the chat because it's a little hard. So if someone wants to let me know if there's anything pressing I need to discuss that's in the chat, just let me know. Why is it so important to speak up? And I always come back to my hero, Frederick Douglass. And he taught us power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. And in that same speech, he said, you know, he who would be free himself must strike the first blow. So we have to speak up for ourselves because that's how power changes. That is very, very important. And no one is going to advocate for us more strongly than we will for ourselves. Although I will say, please, allies, step up and put some skin in the game and get involved too. I also think, take a minute to just absorb this cartoon, which I love. Yeah, it's chill. It's a great Instagram account to follow. Hey, this thing happened to me. It's never happened to me. I don't think it happens. I'm telling you, it does. It's happened to me too. It's never happened to me. I don't think it happens, right? Part of the reason why people don't speak up is because they're afraid that if they do, they will be gaslit, or the person that they are speaking up to will fly off the handle, or it will have some kind of, it will lead to retaliation. You know, I remember meeting a Black woman in Atlanta who worked for IBM her entire career. And, you know, she had to really think every single day as the only Black woman, do I speak up in this situation? Because 5 years from now, when I'm under consideration for promotion, will they remember that time when I spoke up? So it's really hard. And one of the best practices that young people who I've mentored have done is to find that workplace best friend, that workplace confidant who you can share these experiences, who will not gaslight you, and who will give you really good advice about whether or not to speak up and or will speak up on your behalf. And if you can expand that to include a lot of people in your workplace so that you have kind of a rapid response network when these things happen, that can be extremely helpful and help you to build the courage. And also for you to go in and to face the leaders within the organization and say, hey, this stuff keeps happening to us and it's unacceptable. Okay, this needs to shift. We need to educate people in this workplace to stop making these harmful assumptions and stop doing this toxic behavior, or we're going to have to leave. You know, this is how we're going to shift the power within the workplace. So I encourage you to band together with your colleagues. So here is a framework for providing the feedback when it happens. And this works for both the person of color or other marginalized person in the workplace experiencing the harm, and for the upstander. So, you know, incident happens, you pull the person aside and you say, hey, I noticed you just did X or said Y. And I was wondering, what were you thinking when you did that? And get the person to really reflect on why they did that. And then say, okay, I'm hearing this was not your intent, but this was your impact when you did this. And I'd like you to consider the impact of your action and apologize because it was really harmful. Okay, I'll give you a minute to just look at this, and I will myself look in the chat and see what is going on. Yes, and I hear you that sometimes, and I see this comment, I've suffered a lot of, as a Black woman, I've suffered a lot of microaggressive behavior from persons of Asian descent in my job. It isn't only minorities versus whites. Yes, I have heard this from many of my friends, particularly in tech companies, that there's a lot of this kind of microaggressive behavior um, uh, among colleagues of color in the workplace. And um, wow, I can't imagine someone new in their career would ever say this. Yes, it's really hard to muster up the courage. This is again why having allies and having workplace confidants and people who will come up and have your and will say this on your behalf is extremely, extremely important. Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing these experiences. I am going to pop out of the chat. So, of course, our ability to provide feedback in this way is predicated upon how we think the person is going to take it, right? If the person is going to fly off the handle or retaliate against us in some way, it becomes that much more intimidating. So in my workshops, I teach people how to respond when someone confronts you. So to own it, don't make it about you, apologize, reflect, try not to repeat, and work on overcoming bias. Use this as a learning opportunity and get better and stop causing this harm. So let's see. Are we ready to do our role play? Um,
We are. So Karen, if you want to start with just you and I first.
Sure, sure. Okay, so this is the scenario, and this is actually based on something that happened to one of the attorneys who is a California Change Lawyer fellow. And so this is an attorney who was working in a, Carlos is playing an attorney who works for a legal services nonprofit, and he's come into work on a Saturday while there is a board meeting going on. And I am playing a member of the board of directors. I'm a Gen X partner at a major law firm, and I serve on the board of directors of the organization. And Chris is another staff attorney at the organization. And I'm gonna pull back up the feedback framework. So I pop out of the conference room where the board meeting is, and I see Carlos, and I come up to him and I say, Carlos, I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Oh, hey, we're having a board meeting in there, and there's some coffee and pastries in there. Could you go clean that up?
Excuse me?
Yeah, uh, there's coffee and pastries in the conference room. Could you remove them? They're kind of distracting us from the meeting.
So I'm a lawyer here, just like you. And I noticed you just assumed that I was the cleaning staff, and I'm wondering what you were thinking when you said that.
Oh my God. Oh, geez. I am so sorry. You know, I saw you here. It was a Saturday, and it never occurred to me that you might be an attorney and working here.
I understand that wasn't your intent, but the impact was very hurtful because I'm actually working on a very important case for this organization. So, I would like you to consider your impact that your action had, and I would also like an apology from you.
Oh God, I am truly sorry. Yes, and thank you for bringing this to my attention. And yeah, thank you. I'm gonna not do that again. Okay, so that's that's take number 1. Let's do take number 2, and this time Chris is going to be an upstander. Okay. Hey, could you go in the conference room? There's some coffee and pastries in there, and could you clean it up?
I'm sorry, what? Excuse me?
So there's a meeting going on in the conference room, and there's some coffee and pastries in there, and it's kind of distracting. Could you clean it up?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess I
Oh,
could do that.
Karen, you may remember me. I'm Chris. I'm a staff attorney here. And I think you might not have had the opportunity to meet Carlos before. He's one of our staff attorneys also, and he's here on the weekend putting in some extra hours to get his work done on behalf of the organization. And I can't help but have overheard what just happened. And I noticed that you asked Carlos to clean up what was happening in the boardroom when he's actually here to work on a case. And so I want you to know that those are the facts. And I'm just wondering what you were thinking when you asked him to do that.
Oh my God. You know, to be honest, I wasn't thinking. I was just moving quickly, and I came out and I saw him, and it never even occurred to me that, you know, he might be here working as a staff attorney.
I can see that it wasn't your intent to mistake him for someone else who he wasn't, but you know, as an organization, we've been working on creating a more inclusive environment, and I'm afraid that what just happened did not comport with what we're trying to do as an organization. Carlos, is there something you want to say about how Karen's comments impacted you?
Yeah, I mean, I understand that wasn't your intent, but it was hurtful, and it's gonna have an impact on like the rest of my day, basically.
I am so sorry. Thank you so much for your service to this organization. I'm really embarrassed, and I'm really sorry.
All right, should we cut?
Okay. How was that for you, Carlos and Chris?
Carlos, you want to go first?
Sure. So yeah, no, I mean, it's you know, I will admit, and especially for folks in the audience, like things don't usually work out that rosy, and it takes a lot of practice sticking to this because it's a surprise. It's that element of surprise that kind of throws you completely off, and so you have to like be able to pull up this framework pretty quickly and then like use it, and that takes a lot of like skill and courage. But I will say that just having this makes it easy, because I think the hardest part for me in my own history has been, where do I start? How do I even start to address this? And so I think that just being able to like turn it back on them and basically hold up a mirror to them and say, can you please be self-aware right now? Just having a framework to say that to someone who's probably a white person and who's probably in a position of power is very, very useful for me.
Yeah, and I'll say, you know, we rehearsed this right before this, and before I saw the framework, I really was much less direct in confronting you. I was trying to kind of make it feel equal between the two, even though there was someone who was harmed and someone who was doing the harm. And so, you know, similar to Carlos, knowing that, you know, if I kind of stick to the script, you know, and just point out the facts, call out the activity, you know, that's harmful, and then give space to the person who was on the receiving end, it just felt easier to do because I knew exactly what to do. It's like, you know, if you're pulled over by the cops, you know exactly, you know, what you're supposed to say, you know, in that moment. So it's similar to being just very prepared, but it was not easy the first time. And even when I knew to be much more direct, it was still hard to do.
Yeah. And what if I had gotten defensive? How would that have felt?
Well, I think it would have, if it were me being the intervener, it would have been on me to kind of protect Carlos from having to respond to what was happening, because it didn't happen to me, but as another person of color, I could really empathize with it. And I think I would have to try and keep my calm also, even though you may have been getting defensive, trying to just stay clear and stick to the facts, and really try and name what had happened in a way that you really listen to what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I also heard you say something that is great for using in the moment, which is saying, I couldn't help but notice. So this is obviously a very full-blown intervention, right? Which you probably would not like stop a meeting, for example. If a microaggression was happening during a meeting, you probably wouldn't do this whole thing. You might do it after the meeting. But if you're in a situation where you can't confront the person directly, like it's happening during a meeting or something, you can say, I couldn't help but notice. I couldn't help but notice you're assuming that Rosa is the legal assistant, but she's actually the attorney.
I notice a lot of things.
Yes, yes. Okay, is there anything in the chat we should respond to right now? Or,
yeah, there is actually. So, so like I said, this was a scenario that we rehearsed, and that had sort of like a bow on it, right? It tidied up well. But a lot of people are wondering how the person would respond if for example, you, Karen, had said that I was being overly sensitive, that I was overreacting. Essentially, if you tried to gaslight me or double down, what's next? What happens after that?
And then let me just add one more. How
Sure.
could this be approached if the aggressor is the boss and the person on the receiving end is a junior?
Yeah. Excellent questions. I mean, I think it's still important to speak up. And this is where having the workplace ally is extremely important, because it is, especially when that person has direct control over you, it can be extremely hard to confront them. Or if they do get into this defensive, retaliatory framework. So this is why it's important often that the person who intervene be a peer of the person who is doing it, and not the person who is being harmed. And this is why having this kind of workshop and training available for everybody in the workplace is extremely important, to encourage people to be those upstanders. And I also encourage that it's important that people also not rush in to be the upstander. There are times when perhaps someone in this situation would not want you to intervene on their behalf. So it's important, if you are going to be an upstander, to pull the person aside who's being harmed and ask them, hey, I noticed this interaction. That sounded terrible. Are you okay? And then say, if it's okay with you, I would like to say something, but I'm only going to do it if it's okay with you, because it's really important to respect those boundaries as well. Right. And let's here's some possible outcomes from this interaction. And I'd like us to think about which one is worse for a culture of belonging, which one is best. Karen says, Carlos, thank you for bringing this matter to my attention. I'm sorry. Karen says, Jesus, why are you making such a big deal? I was just moving quickly and made a simple mistake. Do you understand I donate thousands of dollars and a lot of time to this organization? I am a good person. Or there's no one like Chris in the workplace. Carlos thinks about saying something to Karen, decides it's not worth it, and swallows their feelings about the encounter. They keeps working, but finds it hard to focus. Instead, they keeps hearing Karen say, "Could you clean up the coffee and pastries over and over again?" Or this incident does not happen. So on a continuum from which is worse for a culture of belonging, which one is best for a culture of belonging, what would you say?
I mean, I think that we all want D. We don't want this to happen. But I think realistically, we have to acknowledge the world we live in, and that this is going to happen, and that we are interact with white folks who do A, right? Who just apologize.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and with the white defensiveness, it's, you know, I know that's extremely harmful and toxic to hear, but you know, and it's a decision about whether you want to experience that, take the risk of experiencing that, or not say anything, and which one is going to be more harmful to you. Again, this is why, like, having those workplace confidants, and having a whole group of you together who can present this to leadership and say, hey, this needs to shift. This is really messed up and it is causing a lot of harm here, is extremely important.
Yeah.
As
So
well as
Karen,
white allies in the workplace speaking up to each other.
we just have a few questions and not too much time left. So just for the folks in the room, we will be going a little over, but we do want to answer some of your questions. So Karen, do you want to go ahead and get started with the Q&A? And I'll read off some questions for you.
Sure.
Great. And if you want to go over to your last couple of slides so that folks know how to contact you.
Oh, sure. Okay, yes. Okay, my last couple of slides. Okay, yes, here's my contact information, racyconversations.com. You can message me on there, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn. Please do contact me on there. I'm working on, so right now I only do in-person workshops, but I'm working on digital workshops, obviously, in this environment, and especially digital workshops for, I mean, not digital, but online workshops for workplace leaders. And so please do contact me if this is something you would be interested in bringing to your workplace.
Thank you. And just a couple of questions. So folks just have a lot of, I think there's a lot of, in the comments and in the Q&A, there's just a lot of questions about specifics. So what about if you are the supervisor, but all the people underneath you are white? So in that situation, right, you technically have the power, but microaggressions can still happen sort of from the bottom up. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I still think asking that question, hey, you just said this to me, and I was wondering, what were you thinking when you said that? I think that's a very powerful question.
Mm-hmm. And what about, you know, like one of the things that a lot of people have is like, how do you, as a bystander, like if you want to be an ally, especially if you are white and you want to be an ally and you see this happening to someone, sort of how Chris saw it happening to me, how do you know when to intervene and not sort of step on and not like shut me up, right? Just not assume that I can't handle it myself.
Yeah, I think that is a very important question. And I think it's really important to ask the person, hey, I noticed this just happened. How are you feeling? Are you okay? Would you want me to say something to this person? Because sometimes people will not want you to say something, and it will actually increase the harm if you swoop in and try and do something. Or sometimes their interpretation of it is very different from the way that you may perceive it, right? On the other hand, sometimes this is happening in real time, and especially if there's a pre-existing relationship there, and you can tell that that the person who's being targeted with the harm is really struggling. Then I think it is okay to step in and say something.
Well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. What about, okay, so the issue is when this happens in public, like in front of people, right? How do you strike that balance of not addressing in the middle of the meeting what just happened, but also not giving off the impression that you're condoning that behavior or permitting it? Like, what happens then?
Yeah, I think the intervention we just did is best done not in front of a whole bunch of people, right? I think it's best done with just the party causing the harm, the person being harmed, and the upstander, if there is an upstander. So, and it's also really important that it happen as soon as possible to when the harm actually occurred, because the longer that you wait, the less likely you are to say anything, because it just becomes harder and harder. That said, in a real-time situation, like in a meeting, I think saying something along the lines of, hey, I couldn't help but notice you just assumed that Carlos is a member of the cleaning team, but he's actually a staff attorney here. So I couldn't help but notice, and correcting it in real time is a way of doing it without doing the full-blown raising of the self-awareness in the intervention.
And well, yeah, thank you for that. And one last question before we let people go. Someone asked something actually very thoughtful, and I've been thinking about it. It was an early question. What about microaggressions hidden behind professional norms, right? So for instance, this person shares with us that one of their past managers talked to them about their clothing choices, even though there was no dress code, and even though that manager had encouraged everyone to dress casually. The manager told this person that they were showing too much skin, but she was the only plus size woman on the staff, the youngest woman, and the way she asked her felt very aggressive.
Yeah. I think then, pushing back on, I feel like you're asking me to change my dress code in a way that's different from the other people who are here. And I was wondering, what were you thinking behind that? I couldn't help but notice you're requiring something different of me than the other teammates.
Mm-hmm. And one person noticed that one of your quotes was from Latasha Adams's work. And so folks are just wondering if you can say a little bit more about her and where they can find more about her work.
Yeah. So when I first created this workshop, I just put on LinkedIn, hey, underrepresented folks in the workplace, what do you wish your colleagues would do differently? And Latasha responded with that really thoughtful list of things. She is actually the director of communications for the National Alliance of Vietnam War Veterans in Washington, D.C. She's on LinkedIn, and she's just a wonderful person. So I encourage to connect with her on LinkedIn and say that you were in this workshop and you saw this fantastic list, and to thank her for that.
Right, thank you. And I actually want to bring Chris back into the fold so that he can address what was actually a pretty common theme in the chat box. How do we talk about microaggression within oppressed groups, and in particular, microaggressions that Black folks might face from folks in the API community?
Yeah, I think I just want to thank all those people for raising it. It's definitely, it happens, and, similar to, I think, how Karen is calling out, her white sisters on combating their internalized bias and racism. I think I similarly want to make a call out to my fellow Asian Americans because, you know, we move through spaces, you know, along the racial hierarchy where we do have more power over others. And sometimes, like right now, with the coronavirus being called the Chinese virus, we can be on the receiving end and feel pretty powerless too and wish others would speak up for us. But how can we expect that if we're not standing up for other people as well, whether in society or in the workplace? So I want to acknowledge that that pain that Asian Americans cause to other people of color is real and it needs to stop. And I just invite Asian Americans within our own community or, you know, in mixed groups or whatever it is to be, you know, taking our role really seriously and how we can be upstanders, how we can challenge anti-Black racism within society, but also even within our own community.
And within ourselves, right? To, you know, not turn into those holier than thou, like I'm so this, that. I mean, I still make mistakes all the time. This is extremely difficult to uproot. And when people hold you accountable to do it with grace and humility and it, you know, we, as I like to say, we didn't learn how to drive overnight. We didn't learn these other really hard things. We didn't pass the bar exam, you know, without a ton of work and practice. And overcoming these extremely deep-seated biases takes a lot of work, okay, and continuous work. So just stay on the path of being a lifelong learner and being in community with each other. And I'm so grateful for California Change Lawyers having this community and providing webinars like this and creating a supportive environment where folks can share their stories, network. This is how we create real change, is by coming together and pressing for change together.
Thank you so much, Karen. I really appreciate it. And just seeing the reaction in the comments section, I know that folks are really appreciative of having the space. So thank you for holding it down. And once again, emoji snaps for Karen in the chat box because she's an incredible person and just so glad to have someone like her in our corner. So thank you, everyone. So just so that you all know, this session is going to be recorded and you can find it on our YouTube channel in a few days. If you registered for this on Eventbrite, you will also receive an email with all of this information, as well as some content from Karen and how to contact her. And I just dropped in the chat box our next two webinars. On May 5th, we're going to be hosting a webinar on Legal Writing 101, hosted by Lindsay Nako from the Impact Fund. And then on May 21st, we're going to be hosting a webinar very similar to this one, so you all might be interested in it. It's on how to beat imposter syndrome. And that one is going to be led by Neha Sempat, who has her own consulting business. So once again, thank you to everyone for coming. And please stay safe and grounded out there.